FireSide chat this evening. Sorry a little bit late, but that's what happens when we've got lions on the move in the evening. And what a wonderful evening it was, eh, Brent?
It was. It was a little bit disappointing towards the end that they crossed into Buffalo's Hook, but that's the nature of the game, I'm afraid. But it's always nice to see them moving rather than sleeping, and it's worth putting in the hours sitting next to sleeping lions to get that last sort of hour, half an hour, sometimes maybe an hour and a half of them on the move.
Exactly, and this evening they got on the move quite early.
Yeah, I think it's because they were quite hungry. Expended a lot of energy this morning chasing the buffalo and the kudu, and with no results. So I think the hunger drove them to get moving at around 6, where there's the last two times they've got moving around 6:45.
Interesting, and these are the interesting things that we like to discuss around the campfire. And most evenings we do have a fire back at the research camp, which is not far from where we are now, and it is a wonderful way for us to discuss what's going on. And that's something that you probably haven't thought about too much. While we're chopping between vehicles, when I'm live, Brent doesn't have a clue what I'm saying or exactly what we're seeing, so around the fire is a good time for us to converse and share stories about what actually happened on our personal drives. You guys know exactly what's going on, but for the two of us it's important to touch base and share tales from not only
our version of the boardroom meeting.
Yes, exactly. So for those of you who are new to the Fireside Chat, we like to kind of run through a few of the highlights of the week, which is what we'll start off doing, and then we'll start answering your questions, and Alex in the final control will do his best to get those questions through to us. Just like the game drive, on Twitter, if you'd like to send a question, you would hashtag Safari Live, and on email, you would send it to questions@wildearth.tv. So get the questions coming through, and Alex, like I said, will do his best to get some of those questions through to us. It's very difficult to answer everyone's, and a lot of questions do come through, which we're very grateful for. So keep them coming. But yeah, Brent's highlights, possibly for you, seeing your first leopard on Juma.
Very, very exciting. Definitely a highlight for me in the last week. Especially, and having you on camera, so we got to share that experience. And especially the situation. I mean, we heard over the radio, and the guy sort of said, "Oh no, she's disappeared into this thick block. Mokulu Hlatin, you're not going to find her," basically. And we got really lucky. I mean, we managed to track his tracks.
Miraculously.
Yeah, instead of tracking a leopard, we're tracking car tracks. And then we sort of lost his tracks for a second, found his tracks, lost his tracks. And then we came there and the sun was sort of glaring right into our eyes. Like, is that a termite mound? Was that a leopard? Oh no, it's a leopard. And quite fitting that it was the Queen of Juma, Karula.
Exactly. You got off to a cracking start there. And what that sighting led to was a continuation of really, really incredible sightings we had with her that afternoon. We followed her for hours, and we had just left her as the sun had set and it was beginning to get dark. She was moving through a very thick area, and we left because we didn't want to flush away any potential prey. In an open area, prey are less likely to run off, but when it's very thick and the vehicle's crashing through the bushes, it will naturally scare off any potential prey for her. We decided to leave so that she could hunt, and within a few minutes she had managed to catch a steenbuck that a nearby vehicle actually heard squealing in distress. And that vehicle drove into where they heard the sound and found Karula with the steenbuck in her mouth. And then we got there, she had gone up the marula tree with the steenbuck, and we left it at that. She didn't feed on it that evening, but went back the following morning and watched her climb up the tree, take the carcass down, feed on it, and then move off into the bushes.
No, I was quite jealous about that. I won't lie. I was a little jealous.
It is a tricky thing for us, especially when we're working on a rotation. Sadly, Mark is not here this evening. He's on leave. So for those of you who are wondering where he is, he's just taking some time off. But when Mark is around and we're all rotating, sometimes you may be on a morning drive and find incredible animals or an incredible potential sighting for the afternoon, but then have the afternoon off. So yeah. It is a tricky thing that we all understand is just part of the deal. And sometimes
we
in the right
can
place,
still have the green-eyed monster from time to time.
Of course. But yes, that was probably one of the early highlights of the week. And then
Mvula was definitely another highlight.
Yeah.
And thank you very much for letting me sneak in there afterwards so I could have a look at him.
It worked out perfectly. It headed down a road to a dam where you were waiting, so it only made sense for Brent to stay there and wait for Mvula to arrive at the dam. And that was a great sighting.
That was wonderful. I mean, he drank right in front of us. Although he was a bit dozy later on when that bushbuck came down 25 meters from him and he just didn't lift his head. He just lay there sleeping and we're like, come, look up, look up, look up. And by the time he looked up, the bushbuck had finished drinking and moved on.
Yeah. He is a beautiful big leopard, though. So you've basically seen the queen and the king of Djuma.
Now I just got to find the princes and princesses.
Yes, exactly. But everything's going well with the leopard viewing, and it's really almost hard to remember the highlights because this past week has been absolutely incredible in terms of sightings. We've seen cats on almost every drive, but
just check with Brian. Brian's kept. We've gone how many? I don't want to jinx it though, but let's just say we've gone a number of days with seeing cats every day. Although pretty much the whole week. We nearly lost it the one day, and then we just managed to sneak those in Kahumas right at the end of drive, which was quite fortunate. But let's just touch wood and hope the streak continues. Yeah,
it really has been good. So, like I said, it's difficult to run through the highlights from the past week, but a recent one
this morning. Wow, it was incredible.
You talk us through, because you started off that whole adventure.
Well, Andrew was with me this morning, and we 20 minutes before drive starts, we bumble out, chatting, and we're chatting about the lions. And I was actually talking about the Nkuhumas. I was like, it's unbelievable what distance they've been covering. And I said, I wonder if they're being pushed by other lions, or they're just not being successful in their hunts and just moving. In
search of prey, yeah.
And then I almost said, oh, it'd be... and referring to those Birmingham males who are still quite young, I said, well, I heard those 5 males were coming in from the north and whatnot, so it'd be interesting to see if mixing up if another big coalition came in. And I was like, wow, that's very strange. There's no Impala or Nyala or anything around the dam. And Andrew just goes, lion. I was like, oh,
problem solved.
Problem solved. And we were very lucky. We had a wonderful sunrise with the lions. And then they proceeded to sleep. For which lions do best, we all know. For the majority of the, must have been a good, almost exactly half the drive. Because then no one else was really wanting to come into the sighting. So I called Scott, and Scott came, and as Scott was coming, you found the buffalo.
Yeah.
And before that, they'd seen waterbuck on the dam wall. They didn't see the bushbuck, but they did see the waterbuck, and they sort of half got up, and the one line here started going off, but then the waterbuck ducked behind the dam wall. Then we saw a bushbuck come out, which they couldn't see, which we could see from where we were positioned. And I think the bushbuck did the same as the bushbuck did with Mvula, snuck down to the edge, had a quick sip, and then disappeared. And then you came in and you said, oh, the buffalo are coming, and then you positioned yourself on the wall, and we positioned ourselves on the other side, and I must say, for those who watched, you'll know from there, it was incredible.
It really was. It was funny when Brian and I were driving around in search of anything interesting. I said to him, you know what, Brent's in a really good position, because even though those lions are sleeping, the waterholes are becoming really active, and especially with buffalo. So I said, Brent's probably going to be sitting there and some buffalo are going to arrive, and then there's going to be action. And literally, surprisingly, a gap opened. There was no game viewers that wanted to go into the sighting. So Brent called me in, which was very kind of him, to spread the love.
Just returning the favor.
Yeah. And as we were on our way there, probably 200 or 300 meters away from Vuyatela Dam, Brian and I bumped into these 2 buffalo bulls marching straight towards the dam. So we knew there was going to be action. But it took a lot longer than we expected for anything to actually kick into
I think there's some Hollywood actors and actresses could learn a bit about building suspense from the Nkahuma Pride. No, it was incredible. I mean, especially having those 2 males there. You would expect them to almost go into hunt mode, and they were hungry.
Yeah, and they sat right at the back.
Yeah. And I mean, Scott and I were having a conversation. I know you can't always hear what the other's saying. And I think Scott was live, and he was like, can you give me an update on the bellies of those lions today? Are they fat? Are they skinny? I was like, no, they're really skinny. The males are completely flat bellies. And he was like, and I was like, it's very strange the way they're behaving. And I just heard Scott say, I'm glad you agree, because I think so as well. No, it was amazing. It was, I don't know, maybe with the 2 younger cubs being separated, maybe they've had a bad experience hunting buffalo. in the last couple of nights.
That's a very good point.
And especially that there were at one stage 4 of those buffalo bulls together. The one lioness only really tried when the one buffalo sort of
really distanced
himself from the other bulls. Who knows? I mean, the secret life of lions when we're asleep.
Exactly. Well, sadly they didn't end up catching anything today, but they did certainly provide us with some great action after they attempted the buffalo kill, which was a miserable fail. They moved on to the kudu, which was an equally miserable fail.
Apart from some really incredible camera work.
Exactly. And the cameramen both need a salute and a round of applause from the presenters, because
you guys
really to film in those scenarios when we're moving around and so much is going on is really not easy. So very good job to the cameramen.
Unbelievable job.
And just looking at the screenshots that a lot of you got, I mean, they look just as good as photographs as if you were here. So really well done to both the cameramen for providing the great shots and also the viewers for snapping off those great screenshots.
Geez, some of your photos are better than mine, and I was there with a big camera.
Anyway, that's, I think, enough of the highlights. So ready for a question? Alex, when you're ready, you can send one through.
Well, let's just hope the next week keeps going like this one.
Chris from California has just asked, good evening, Chris, just asked us how we feel when we are kind of surrounded by lion or in amongst lion in terms of our adrenaline levels, and, you know, do we get really scared or excited? What do you think, Brent?
Well, I suppose it's a bit different for us who've been working and live out in this every day. I get excited rather than scared. I really like it when we're with the lions and they're around us, and especially in the hunting. I actually showed, I think it was Andrew today. I was like, oh, they're going to get a buffalo. But so it's I don't feel nervous at all. I don't know about you, Scott.
I agree. It's certainly more a feeling of excitement than fear, because it really is exciting to have such apex predators, such beautiful animals in such close proximity to you, especially when they're on the move, walking past the vehicles. When they do stop and look at you at that proximity, I wouldn't say it scares me.
But there's an instinctual response.
But yes, and your awareness to how dangerous they could be certainly becomes heightened. So it's maybe more of a respect thing than a feeling of fear. But when they lock eye contact with you from close proximity, that does get the
1,000-yard stare. They don't look at you, they look through you.
Exactly. So good question though, Chris, and thanks for asking that. You should try your best to get out here and experience it firsthand. It really is a rush, especially for the first time. Like most things in life, a first-time experience can be the most memorable, and having any predator in close proximity to you for the first time certainly will get the blood pumping. Okay, Alex.
Oh, excuse me. Bit of smoke, change of direction there. Very swirly wind. Well, it's good news for the Nkuhumas.
It is good hunting weather, this windy weather. Well, an interesting question also relating to the Nkuhumas from Tom. Good evening, Tom. And Tom has asked what we think about how the Matimba males kind of accepted and were almost bonding with the young Nkuhuma male today, as opposed to being offish. The other afternoon, I saw him try and mount one of the lionesses. So he is getting to that stage.
He is.
Of his maturity, yet the Matimba males are not really showing too much hostility towards him. What do you think about that?
I think a lot of that, if you saw him try and mount one of the females, I think that's more just sort of the beginning of testosterone. He's not quite sure what to do yet. And,
exactly. He certainly didn't know what he was doing.
And he's definitely, I think, even if he managed to get it right, which I don't think he would, to mate with the female, he probably isn't mature enough yet to have swimming sperm, for lack of a better description.
Yeah.
And, I mean, the males are his father, and he is, I mean, how old is he? Probably just pushing 2.5?
I think it's 2.5, close on that, possibly closer to 3 now, but
sure.
A lot of the viewers will be able to clarify that for us. So, Alex, we await the viewers' advice on the young male from the Nkuhuma's
His age, yeah. But I mean, it's a strong possibility that one of the coalition is his natal father. So I mean, it's not uncommon for male lions to show affection to their male offspring to a point. Where that point is, it's difficult to say.
And how quickly it can
change,
turn it is difficult to say. It's the same as a leopardess with her cubs and kicking cubs out of her life more than her territory initially. She just wants to get rid of them and stop them relying on her for feeding them. And then eventually they kind of establish that they need to move on. But even that, it can happen quite quickly, and it can happen over huge varying lengths of time. From 18 months to 2 years is the general rule for leopards. So for lion, it's also kind of, I think, between 3 and 4 years as the general rule, as a rough age limit or an age gap that young males can be expected to be booted out by the dominant males.
And it can change from pride to pride, and to do with the different coalitions.
Yeah. Good question, though, Tom, and thanks for sending that through. We're just going to have to watch that space and see what happens. Potentially in the next few months while we're here, we could see a turn in affections and feelings between the Matimba males and that young Kuhuma male. Okay, Alex. Okay, we've got a question from Mary. Good evening, Mary.
Hello.
Mary is asking, how many languages do we speak?
Well, do we speak or do we speak well? There's a very...
I think so that you can get by in a general conversation in any country or place of that language. So good enough to...
Just to get by. Well, English Afrikaans.
Yeah.
I can probably understand a lot more Zulu than I can speak these days. Mm-hmm. And the same goes with Shangaan, although Shangaan is very difficult, all those high-pitched whistles.
Yeah.
And probably Swahili.
Mm-hmm. And the reason why you say that you feel that you could understand a lot more Zulu and Shangaan than you could speak, is that because you've got another African language that's kind of a more recent language that you've been speaking?
And learning, I suppose.
And learning.
When we were younger, as was Scott's also from the same province I'm from, and it's the home of the Zulu nation. So we spoke Zulu on the farm and stuff from little kids. And then you sort of go to school and you got English and Afrikaans and then moved to Botswana and then you got Setswana, which I battled with. I mean, completely different. I don't know. It's also I just haven't spoken it enough. With the Shangaan, I've spoken more recently, so I don't know, it's difficult. Mm-hmm. But strangely enough, out of all the ones, is the place I've spent the least time is the language I remember the most of, which is Swahili.
Is that not because it was most recently that you were speaking that language? Or
no.
Full time in a bush environment where you're more likely to be speaking
exactly. And a very similar experience to what you had with Swahili, literally in the bush, no other people who could speak English. It's either teach 25 people how to speak English, or you learn Swahili.
Exactly. And it's interesting because Brent and I are very similar then, because English and Afrikaans were our kind of languages that we did at school. And Afrikaans, for those of you who don't know, is essentially a language of Dutch descent from the Dutch settlers that settled here and pioneered a lot of South Africa amongst with the British. So anyway, it's a language of Dutch origin, and I also spoke Zulu growing up in my hometown, and then Shangaan working here in the Sabi Sands, and then went to East Africa and started speaking Swahili. So now my kind of language filing cabinets upstairs is
it gets a bit
the freshest files are the Swahili ones, and even now when I'm in the bush and around local people, I want to speak Swahili to them. If they speak Shangaan or speak Zulu, I can understand it because it comes back from the old dusty filing cabinets. But if I want to speak to them, I battle to find
the right words
without using Swahili, which is the most recent language I've been speaking.
The funniest thing is when I arrived in Gabon, everyone there speaks French. Central and West Africa, French is the dominant language. And I start saying hello in Shangaan, in Swahili, in Zulu, and I'm just getting these strange looks. Oh, yeah, my French is atrocious.
Okay, so Brent is not a French speaker, and neither am I, sadly. It's a beautiful language. I love the sound of French people speaking, but I'm no good at it myself. So we're both then essentially in the same language category, with 5 languages that we can get by with, depending on which we've been speaking most recently.
Exactly.
But English is our mother tongue.
Mother tongue.
Okay, Alex.
It's always on these windy nights, you sort of listen a little bit extra. You never know. Just take the spotlight, have a look around.
It is important to keep an eye out, so well done. Thanks for that, Brent. Okay, Suzanne from the Netherlands, good evening and welcome to the Fireside Chats. This question I think is geared to Brent mainly, but we've both been involved in a bit of animal capture and relocation in our time, so we can both shed light on that. Suzanne has asked about a specific reserve in KwaZulu-Natal, also in South Africa, called Pinda. And it's a wonderful reserve, but it's small and enclosed by a fence, and therefore it requires management of the animals within there because it's not a big enough ecosystem to take care of itself. And Brent grew up, and his father was a founder of Pinda. And Suzanne is just asking to know about the animal relocation and how it works, and do they use helicopters? How do you dart them? How do you transport them? How does the whole animal management happen and relocation of animals?
It depends a lot on the species. At Pinda, you had a lot of your sort of Inyala, your small to medium-sized antelope were occurring naturally already on some of the farms, Impala, Inyala, wildebeest, zebra. But so with those type of species, when you capture them, in the old days, actually in those days when they used to catch Inyala, it was quite a hardcore thing. I remember going on as a small kid with the game capture team. They would literally drive up to Inyala, blind it with a spotlight, and a Zulu man would jump out of a Land Rover and literally tackle it. And then they would blindfold it, tie it up, and put it in the back of the car. Fortunately,
with no
sedative, nothing. Oof. Just
okay.
Yeah. So basically, make sure the horns couldn't stab you, and then tie the feet up. But obviously, things have progressed since those days. So now, generally, with a lot of what we would call mass capture. So if you're catching 50 impala or 25 eland or wildebeest or whatnot, they would use helicopters and funnels. So they would chase the animals with a helicopter into a funnel.
And the funnel made out of tarpaulin?
No, out of Hessian sack.
Okay.
Yeah. Or tarpaulin. I've seen plastic ones as well, but generally Hessian. And then they would chase them through into a boma and then and close the gate sort of behind them. And then from there, they would actually move that Hessian further and further down the funnel and forcing them into the back of a game capture truck is one way.
And they would often sedate them in the boma in this day and age to make sure that once they go into the vehicle that they're going to be transported in.
And one of the other big things they do, especially with horned antelopes, is when they're in that tightest section of that crush, so to speak, like a cattle crush, you have guys on top with plastic pipes who literally sit there and go whoop onto the horn, whoop, so they don't hurt themselves or stab each other while they're in the truck being moved. But that's sort of for your more sort of your antelopes and that. Rhino, elephant are mostly sedated, and then semi-sedated,
or by helicopter,
or by vehicle. Just depends on the situation, how many animals you're doing. So if you're only doing one rhino or one elephant, there's no point in hiring a helicopter and doing it. But if you're doing 25 rhino, there's no way you're going to be able to move around the reserve fast enough to dart and create 25 rhinos in a day. Yeah. But with a helicopter you can. So they would be darted, semi-sedated. Then you walk up and you put a blindfold over their eyes, and you put a brake rope, which is basically a thick Hessian rope. And when the rhino gets sedated, they do a sort of high jig. Their legs come up very high like this, and you basically try get a lasso basically around the front leg and the back leg, and tighten that, and that's how you steer him. One guy on the horn, a couple of guys on each rope, and then you steer them and you walk them semi-sedated into the crate, and you keep them blindfolded and whatnot while they're in the crate.
And often even you need people, correct me if I'm wrong, but in my experience you've almost had to have 5 or 6 people on either side of the rhino it's conscious enough to walk and stand up, but it's quite dizzy
Wobbly,
and wobbly. So you need about 5 or 6 people on either side, at least, of the animal pushing against it to make sure it doesn't topple over. So there's people pulling from the front, pulling from the back, and keeping it upright from the side. So it's a serious operation,
And one of the
requiring a lot of manpower.
The most common injuries during rhino captures is someone's had their foot stood on, because they did that high lift jink. It's quite funny when it happens, though.
Not if you're the person whose foot is being stood on.
No, true, but touch wood.
Yeah.
I haven't had my foot stood on by a rhino yet.
It is, Susanna, it's a really interesting industry, the game capture industry, and it's a hugely necessary industry in South Africa because there are not only Pinder, there are many other reserves like Pinder that are small, and they can actually share game and share genetics between one another, and will often swap animals between small reserves to help with genetics, and it's a great way to ensure that these smaller pockets of wilderness can still be maintained and can still contain wild animals, because without the human intervention,
and
it would be
contribute to the better of a species with the genetics being able to variate them. Yeah.
Of course.
Very important.
And interestingly, on top of that, just to finish off Suzanne's question, is the number of small reserves is growing in South Africa, which is great. It's difficult in a developed country like this to find untouched wilderness that you can just put a fence around and look after. Those days are gone. In other African countries, that is still possible. They just lack funding. In South Africa, people have gone from domestic farming back to wildlife. So they've actually reverted back to natural ecosystems, planted natural vegetation, indigenous vegetation, brought back game that used to occur there, but then was taken off for farming. And these little areas are being turned back into wilderness areas, but they are small and do need management. But like Brent says, they're contributing hugely to the greater good of all the species, because there are these areas that can now contain more wildlife than essentially we could contain safely before.
Good questions.
Yeah, very good question. Thanks for sending that through. Whew, we've got a bit of a controversial question that's come through, putting us on the spot, from Sandy in Michigan, I believe. Good evening, Sandy. And Sandy's asking what we think in Indiana. Sorry, Sandy from Indiana. Sandy is asking what we think about lion parks and smaller and similar places, I guess, not only lion parks, but any small park where animals are not kept in a natural environment and are kept in small pens, essentially. Let me start.
You go first.
Let me start, if you don't mind.
Not at all.
Like anything in life, even doctors and lawyers, any profession or any industry, you're going to get good people and you're going to get bad people. And I think a lot of smaller parks or similar, similar kind of setups like a lion park where animals are in captivity, you may get some that are run with the greater good of the animal as the main focus, and you may get others that are run as money-making ventures. And, you know, we all know that humans are greedy and will do strange things when money is involved. So we probably hear about a lot of the worst stories that are made public, as a lot of bad stories are, I guess, in today's media. And we focus on the negative lion parks where animals may not be looked after well, or may be then sold off for canned lion hunting. Those are all things that do happen. But I don't think it's fair to say that all of them are going to be negative, and you are going to get some that are run properly and will help have an increased genetic pool. They may not be wild animals, but those genes are still there and the animal is still living. That's something that we would love for a lot of endangered animals that don't exist anymore.
Very true.
So it's a tricky one.
No, as Scott says, unfortunately in most places, the well-run ones are in the minority.
Yeah.
And the tourist traps, as I like to call them, are in the majority, where the animals are mistreated and used for financial gain.
Yeah.
But if we get started too much on this, it could go on for hours and hours.
Exactly, and it is, and that's it's the sound of a very good question.
Yes, it is. Yeah. No, but I think Scott handled that extremely well. There are good ones and there are bad ones. Just unfortunately, at the moment, there are more bad ones than good ones.
Yeah.
And hopefully that can change in the future.
Yeah. So if you know of any or plan on going to any, possibly just really do your research into the place and try and find out as much as you can about it before supporting it. That would be my only advice on the subject. Okay, Alex, next question.
Just quickly, for our US viewers there, 60 Minutes USA actually did an expose on some of those places quite recently, so I'm sure you can find that online somewhere.
Liv from Brooklyn, good evening and welcome on board, Liv. Welcome on board, welcome to the Fireside Chats. Slipped into autopilot there. Liv is asking whether we do any research and whether we would like to become a professor at a college any day, maybe lecturing people on what it is we do, or how to become a guide or a person that works out here in the bush.
It's a good question, Liv. I've assisted on research. I'm definitely not a scientist, though. It's quite an interesting thing at guiding and science, which a lot of people would naturally assume would to be very, very interconnected or not, because quite often scientists make terrible guides and guides make terrible scientists, even though we have a huge passion for the same thing. And that's possibly due because as a guide you're more of an entertainer, as well as you sharing your knowledge in a different way and with a different type of people. The people are not going to go in always into the huge depth and study zoology or biology or whatnot, but no, we're always happy to help anyone who would like to become a guide. Done a bit of training over the years in different places, but I don't know. As long as I'm in the bush, it doesn't really matter what I'm doing. I'm quite happy.
Exactly. It is kind of something that you naturally find yourself doing, Liv. As you become more experienced out here in the bush, you'll always be around people that know less than you, and then naturally find yourself teaching them little things that you've learned over the years from other older, more experienced guides. So it's kind of something that you naturally pass down to people. And the lucky thing about what we do and the knowledge we acquire doing it is that people are often very interested to learn about it, which makes it easy being a teacher when your class is interested in what you can teach them. So we're in a unique situation. Yeah, where like I say, a lot of the people that are asking you the questions are truly interested in what you're doing and what your answer will be. So that does make for an easy platform to teach from.
Very, very well.
So good question though. I don't see myself being a professor lecturing anyone, but certainly love to share as much as I can with anybody about what I know out here, and it's a never-ending mountain of knowledge to climb in the wilderness because there's just so many things to keep you guessing.
And you'll see both Scott's and my rooms, it's just piles of tree books, grass books, flower books. You can never stop learning.
Yeah. So good question, Liv. Thanks for sending that through. Right.
Breeze is still keeping us nice and cool.
Okay, Dennis in Spain, good evening and welcome to the Fireside Chats. Dennis is asking us, is it dangerous to be sitting out here with lions about hunting, leopards, hyena? He was focused on the lion though mainly, but there are also leopard and hyena out here, Dennis, that could pose a threat to us. What do you think about that, Brent?
It's more dangerous to cross the road.
Not here though. Cross the road in the city.
Cross the road in the city. Yeah, not yet. Well, what we're doing is we are making quite a lot of noise in the way we're speaking, which actually sometimes does attract predators because they're curious. But we are conscious, and you notice we do check behind us, and you'll notice we've chosen a very open area to sit. It's not like we're sitting in a riverine thicket, which that would be quite silly. But we've chosen an open area. I think normally we 100% fine. We would see or hear something that would give away. There's a wildebeest down there, and there's some impala over there, so they would act as our alarm system if a predator did happen to come. And hopefully Andrew would act as our alarm system over there.
Yeah. So we've got kind of all our bases covered, but there's obviously a small chance something could happen. But a lot of the animals in this area and throughout Africa are cautious of humans. They've been persecuted by humans for hundreds and thousands and millions of years. So it's not something new to them that humans pose a threat. And animals avoid risk at all costs. Humans are a lot more likely or prone to take risks than animals, because animals don't have doctors, they don't have medical aid, there's no insurance. You can't take a chance, because if you get injured or make a wrong move, it could be the end of your life. Whereas humans are not really on the same wavelength there, I don't think. So just the fact that there's a fire here, a lot of lights, our voices, our smell, it's not something that
attracts.
They associate to food.
And we don't smell like people used to smell when we lived on the savannah. We smell like deodorant and shampoo, and then we've got petrol and engine oil and all the other really strong smells that will mask.
Yeah. So it is something that we have to be cautious of, and certainly when out at nights in any wilderness destination, it's certainly worth keeping an eye on what's behind you. But unless you're asleep, you've probably got a good chance of chasing away anything that comes to cause trouble with you. If you fall asleep at a fire like this, you could wake up with any kind of predator around your neck, because they know you're asleep, and therefore they know you're not a threat to them because you're very vulnerable. So there are a few horror stories of people getting taken out of tents that they haven't zipped up, or falling asleep near a fire and waking up with a hyena around their neck. So it does happen. It certainly does, but in unique situations, and as long as you're keeping an eye out, like most dangerous scenarios you face in life, as long as you
as long as you respect the area you're in and the situation you're in, you should be fine.
Just as you would kind of, any city's got a bad area, or an area where you'll kind of heighten your senses and be on alert mode and make sure your wallet's deep in your pockets. That's the same world over, and all of us know that feeling that you get when in a certain area, and I guess it's a similar feeling to that. You just heighten the necessary senses to the surroundings that you're in. Okay, so just about under 5 minutes, or close to 5 minutes left. We've got a time for a few more questions, and Alex is doing a great job sending them through, so thanks, Alex, and you, the viewers, are doing a great job sending them through to Alex, so thank you very much. Okay, Safari Girl in Florida, good evening and welcome.
Hello.
Safari Girl is asking, should we be concerned about the kuhuma's state at the moment in terms of their hunger? Could they die tomorrow? How much longer do they have to make a kill? What are our thoughts on their scenario and their lack of nutrition at the moment?
I don't think they're quite there yet. I could probably go another up to 10 days without eating before they would be in real dire straits. I'm pretty sure they'll be fine. However, the two young, sort of almost sub-adults, not so sure how well they'll do by themselves. I don't think.
And the Pride was heading in the opposite direction.
They were heading towards Manyeleti.
It would have been interesting to know what those two youngsters, what direction they were heading in, because they probably would have started moving in some direction.
Yeah, they would have. So them by themselves probably doesn't bode very well for them. But as I said this afternoon, we will try to find out some more while on drive tomorrow. Mm-hmm. But that happens. I know it seems terrible and harsh, but that's nature. But I don't know. It could have been the TV slowing them down. That maybe just they weren't. They could have had parasites. Who knows?
Maybe they've just been through a bad patch.
Yeah.
You know, tough hunting. It happens, and maybe tonight they'll get lucky. like Brent said, though, the concern is for the two youngsters, and
No, not the pride itself.
it's not only because they're alone and therefore can't defend themselves nearly as well as they could with the rest of their pride backing them, but they will be more hungry than the rest of the pride because they wouldn't have been able to compete as well on the last few kills that the pride has made. So the bigger adults that you saw this afternoon with Brent will be in a far better and fed on more recently than those two youngsters who wouldn't have been able to compete at the kills and therefore will be even more hungry than the adults you saw this evening. So their problems are compounded by that.
Yeah, unfortunately it's not looking good for those two little ones.
Yeah, but they're far from a write-off, and you
No,
do have
you
some
never write them off.
incredible miracles out here in terms of animals making it from out of nowhere. So it's too soon to panic there. We don't have to worry about that, I don't think. But it will be very interesting to know where the animals have ended up in the morning when we get out. So it'll be worth tuning into the AM drive. There's going to be a lot of interesting stuff to find out.
Very true.
Okay, time for one more question. Joanne in Arizona, good evening and welcome along. Joanne is asking that she's heard Inyala are not indigenous to this specific area of South Africa and are more from Zululand and Natal, where we grew up. And are they having an impact on their smaller cousin, the bushbuck? And if so, are people researching it? What's being done about it? What are your thoughts on that, Brent?
It's a very, very good question, John. So Inyala were probably introduced to the Sabi Sands in the mid to late 60s to the south of us here on the Sand River. Now, this is quite a funny one because Inyala do naturally occur in the Kruger, not very far from here. They're a relatively young species, and in their distribution, they've actually been slowly moving up the coast and up the river systems. So they would have got here eventually. We just sped it along. And they definitely do have effect on bushbuck populations, especially if we don't get any more rain in a year like this, where it's going to be very dry and there's going to be a lot of competition for that browse level. And the main reason is because they can browse higher. So the bushbuck end up down here, and then the Inyala can just sort of finish up everything above them and leave the bushbuck with their little food. So they do affect. I don't know, I've never heard of anyone doing any research. Have you?
No, I haven't heard of anybody researching it. Only comments from people that have spent longer in the Sabi Sands, and I'm talking many years, and some people say that they have noticed a notable difference in bushbuck numbers due to the increase in Inyala.
It would make sense.
100%. So it is interesting. And would be nice to try and find out a bit more about that. I'm sure if we ask around in the Sabi Sands, we'll be able to try and find out a bit more information on that, because it is a great question and something that would be very interesting to shed more light on. Okay, so we've got just a few more seconds to say goodbye, and thanks very much everyone for joining in the Fireside Chats. I'm sorry if we didn't answer your questions. There's so many that come through. But there'll be another one next week, Sunday, so Brent and Mark will be here for that. Sadly, I won't be here for the next one, so this is my last one for a while, and it's been really wonderful to share it with you. So thank you very much from myself.
Thanks very much, guys, and thanks, Scott, for fielding the questions, and we'll see you all bright and sprightly tomorrow morning for Game Drive.
Exactly. Have a wonderful evening.